Okay, and now it's time for our morning recap of the action over there in Japan, the land of the rising sun. What was Inoue's bid to become a two-time undisputed champion? And as I stated, I felt eventually he'd knock out Marlon Tapales at the start. You see both men giving each other a lot of respect. Nobody's ready to commit to anything. Not yet, though I will say, in the second round, as Marlon Tapales was trying to come on, he got caught coming in. Looked like it was a counter left hand.
He hit the deck, but the referee ruled it a slip. I don't know why, since it was off a punch.
Very controlled pace through rounds 1 and 2. Round 3, Inoue, aggressive at the start, throwing combinations, punching around Marlon Tapales' high guard.
Searching for holes around it, looking to open up Marlon Tapales, and most of that round, Inoue had lead foot advantage. This was a battle of the orthodox fighter versus the southpaw, Inoue being the orthodox fighter, Marlon being the southpaw.
As stated, Naoya Inoue had lead foot advantage most of that round, in the most optimal position to punch and get off his backhand. Things were a lot more spirited in the fourth round. You saw combinations from both guys in the phone booth.
Marlon Tapales looking to fight fire with fire, though comparatively, Inoue had the more thudding shots of the two, which comes as a surprise to no one.
Very good body work mid-range to inside from Naoya Inoue. Two right hands to the body and a left to the head that rocked Marlon Tapales, as well as a big counter left hand.
Later on,
rocked Marlon Tapales, stunned him, at which point Inoue moves in and unloads a salvo of punches, scoring the first official knockdown of the fight.
Things were picking up from round 3 into round 4, though the pace of the fight and just trying to go toe-to-toe with him, trying to fight fire with fire, that's what got Marlon Tapales rocked. That's what got him knocked down.
At the tail end of the fourth round, at the start of the fifth, sensing that he could get his man out of there, that he might be hurt from the previous round, Inoue started off aggressive. Big combinations, good back and forth action towards the middle.
Middle of the round, it would seem that Marlon had gathered himself enough to start fighting back.
Inoue landed some eye-catching shots that round, though. An eye-catching uppercut, an eye-catching counter right hand that once again rocked Marlon Tapales in the sixth round. It was Marlon Tapales stepping into his shots and backing up Naoya Inoue, at least at the start, punching out of his high guard, trying to catch and shoot. Inoue moved, setting traps, trying to.
The tempo of the fight started slow.
Marlon Tapales making adjustments, using a shell guard instead of a high guard. In the seventh round, we saw Marlon started off with a couple of good jabs, and as stated, he was using a shell guard instead of a high guard, and that shell guard did a much better job of protecting him from those right hands from Inoue.
Marlon Tapales, the southpaw, jabbing with his right while keeping his left high, keeping his left at home to protect that side of his face from those right hands.
An adjustment from Marlon Tapales that saw him having a better round in the seventh round than the previous rounds before it. But Inoue, he made an adjustment to Marlon Tapales' adjustment by doubling up on the right hand after he lets it go. Instead of just shooting it once, he tried 2-3 times.
Figuring that even if he doesn't catch Marlon with the first right hand he gets off, he might be able to catch him with the second or the third.
Eighth round rolls around. And at this point, the pace has slowed a bit from what we saw in the third and fourth rounds. Marlon Tapales was fighting smarter, turning Inoue and using that shell guard instead of that high guard. That shell guard that gave him so much success in the previous round. Good single shots from Marlon Tapales in the eighth, here and there.
The seventh round and the eighth round were arguably Marlon's best rounds in the fight.
In the ninth round at the start, Inoue was a lot more aggressive, doubling and tripling up on the right hand after the jab, rocking Marlon Tapales with the jab in the straight. Inoue pressing Marlon Tapales from one corner of the ring to the other, landing two very heavy right hands towards the tail end of the ninth before going into the 10th,
where he stopped him.
In spite of all the success that he was having, defending himself from right hands with that shell guard, for some reason Marlon Tapales goes back to using that high guard, at which point, 1 minute into the round, Inoue gets off a sneaky right hand right down the middle, right through the guard, that rocks Marlon Tapales and sends him down for the second time officially, and he could not recover, he could not beat the count, he got counted out, and Inoue effectively became a two-time undisputed champion and a 4-division champion overall.
The prediction stuck. I figured Marlon Tapales would put up some semblance of a fight. He'd be able to put up a fight, but he knew he would eventually get him out of there, and he did.
Story of the fight, at least to me, Marlon quickly realized he's not strong enough. He doesn't have the same power that he knew he has to try to win the gunfight by fighting fire with fire. Thus, when he elected to box, take a more measured approach, while he wasn't taking as much damage, he was still getting pushed around. He was still getting outworked, losing the fight on both fronts as both the boxer and the puncher. He just didn't have it for Naoya Inoue, and there's no shame in that. He knew he's one of the best fighters in the world. But that's the gist of it. When he tried to fight fire with fire, he got sent to the canvas, and when he tried to box, while he was getting hit less, he was also getting bullied. He was also getting pushed around. This fight, in spite of being an undisputed title fight, didn't seem to have the same air around it as the Stephen Fulton fight, at least not in the West, perhaps because people in the West, many of them, they may not be as familiar with Marlon Tapales, or maybe a lot of them just, they don't have a horse in the race.
Marlon did better than Stephen did.
Marlon made it competitive in spots. He did make Inoue work for his meal, but eventually he got it, and I knew that he would. Congratulations to him. Immediately after the fight, Inoue confirmed that he's already in negotiations to defend his titles against his mandatory challenger by way of the WBC, Luis Nery, who in previous years was banned from fighting in Japan by the Japanese Boxing Commission. Nery tested positive for silbaterol.
It's a weight-cutting agent.
Tested positive for the banned substance after the first Shinsuke Yamanaka fight, and in the second, he blew the weight. On that predication, the Japanese Boxing Commission decided they'd had enough, and Luis Nery would not be allowed to box on Japanese soil moving forward, though it seems interest in the fight, interest from Inoue in doing it as well, interest from the fans as well, because I'm sure the boxing fans in that region of the world would love to see Inoue swap punches with this guy and give him what for what he did to Shinsuke Yamanaka, his countryman, years ago. Most of which we talked about already. I like Inoue's chances against Luis Nery. That promises to be a banger. A fight between two punchers, though one guy has more of a boxing brain. One guy is more than just brawn.
More than just muscle. More than just a strong puncher.
Inoue isn't always thought of as being a cerebral boxer or a thinking man's fighter due to his power and his highlight reel knockouts, but what leads up to the knockout. More than just a strong puncher. Luis Nery's a strong puncher. There are lots of strong punches in the sport of boxing, and Inoue is a bit more than just that, and in any event,
I think he can handle this assignment.
A fight with Luis Nery has been talked about off and on for years. It's definitely a fight that Luis Nery's been asking for, a fight that he wants, and he may yet get the chance, though, you know the old saying, be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. Luis Nery, he's a strong puncher himself, though not much of a boxer, and he's open for a lot of shots, a lot of punches. Stepping into his shots and trying to put pressure on Inoue, looking for the knockout, he may get himself knocked out. So I do like Inoue's chances in that fight.
A fight with more backstory than this one.
When he first got to super bantamweight earlier this year, after dispatching Stephen Fulton, talks already started up about him maybe moving up to featherweight immediately after, or all the way up to 135 pounds for a Gervonta Davis fight, when there are perfectly good fights right there for him. A fight with Luis Nery, a fight with MJ Akhmadaliev, the former unified super bantamweight champion. Now they have a common opponent between them, MJ and Inoue. Marlon Tapales, he's the one who took MJ's titles.
MJ, who has since rebounded off that loss and fought in a WBA final eliminator in his last fight.
I believe it was a WBA final eliminator. That means that Inoue has two mandatory challengers in the queue. One is Luis Nery by way of the WBC, and MJ Akhmadaliev by way of the WBA. I feel like MJ Akhmadaliev, comparatively, he's got more ring craft, more ring savvy, and more subtleties to him than Luis Nery, in spite of Luis having more pro bouts.
More fights.
You hear more about Inoue versus Nery than Inoue versus Akhmadaliev because, well, Inoue versus Nery has more backstory, seemingly, but the idea that Inoue might make it past that guy and have a showdown with MJ Akhmadaliev, the former champion for what would be all the marbles, all the belts, that's a very intriguing proposition because MJ, he's more than just a strong puncher.
Looked real good in his last fight.
What's encouraging is that Inoue's people aren't wasting any time, that the wheels are already in motion for what could be his next fight. So often we end up talking about how inactive today's fighters are compared to yesterday's, yesteryears, that these guys, they really could stand to fight more often. Well, here you have a fighter like Naoya Inoue, who's a celebrity, a big draw in his region of the world, and he's not using his marquee value as an excuse to skip out on fighting certain fighters, his marquee value as an excuse to not be active. No, he's very active. They're already working on his next fight.
This is boxing done right.
The way it's supposed to be. Quality fight after quality fight with quality fighters. You beat this guy, you move on to the next one, because that's what the job is. Without any of the housewives of Atlanta energy we see here in the West between fighters, all the bickering back and forth online in front of everybody, just for nothing to materialize from it. Nada. Find it refreshing that you can have a fighter the caliber of an Inoue scheduling all the fights that need to be made in sequence, one after the next, on a regular schedule, without the same tired tropes we see here in the West, all the overused tactics and shenanigans, and still be able to do good business, good numbers, and put on good, entertaining fights.
The breath of fresh air.
Because so much of what we see in the West, in the American boxing scene, it all just seems dated and overused, and for what? For guys like Gervonta Davis to never get around to fighting Vasyl Lomachenko, or Teofimo Lopez, or George Kambosos, or Devin Haney, or Shakur Stevenson after him. The abundance of online arguments you see in the American boxing scene doesn't result in an abundance of fights.
So who needs them?
With Inoue, what you're getting is all the fights that need to be made at or around his weight, without any of the nonsense, so credit to him for getting the job done. Now, as a result of that victory, Naoya Inoue advances on the RINGIQ pound-for-pound list from the number 2 spot to the number 1 spot. The reasoning being as followed, where Terence Crawford, who was ranked at number 1, where he's been a champion at 3 weights, Naoya has been a champion in 4. And where Terence Crawford took belts from 5 reigning champions, Naoya Inoue has taken belts from 7. Technically 8, if you count Nonito Donaire 2 times.
Remember, they had 2 fights for 2 separate belts. The first time it was for Nonito's WBA, the second time it was for the WBC.
There have been a lot of debates about this in the build-up of what was Inoue versus Tapales. Should Inoue win, is that enough for him to surpass Terence Crawford as the consensus number 1 pound-for-pound fighter? And some are raising the point that, well, Inoue was the wide favorite to win this morning's fight. Guys that are going as far as bringing up how the odds makers have it, or whether or not Marlon Tapales has been knocked out before, all in an effort to marginalize Inoue's potential victory over him. But need I remind you that Terence Crawford, he's been the favorite in practically every fight he's had against every champion. He was the favorite over Ndongo, the favorite over Postol. He was even the favorite over Errol Spence Jr. In fact, what you'll find with most of these fighters in a pound-for-pound list, the ones ranked on them, is that they're usually the favorites to win their fights. So if you're going to use that criterion to marginalize Inoue's win over Tapales, you would have to use that same criterion on everybody, including Terence Crawford.
It's a poorly crafted argument.
What those arguing are actually doing are just trying to rationalize their own feelings. They feel that Terence should still be at number 1, even though Inoue in many ways has matched his 2-time undisputed claim, but surpassed him in other departments. He's been a champion at more weights than Terence Crawford has, and he's beaten more champions than Terence Crawford has.
You guys are just trying to rationalize your feelings.
You feel that Terence should still be number 1 for some other reason that you really can't quantify based on the facts and the stats. But I'm not here to rate fighters on your feelings, based on your feelings and whatever elicits more of them. The facts show that he knew he's been a champion at more weights and beaten more champions than Terence, so that gives him a credible enough argument to move past him. It's a very simple matter when you take the feelings out of it.
They say that none of those guys that Inoue fought were pound for pound.
But I can turn right around and say that none of those guys Terence fought were as accomplished as Nonito Donaire. That was a more accomplished fighter than any fighter Terence ever fought at any of those weights, 135, 140, or 147. So the pendulum swings both ways, and as stated, it's a very haphazard argument to have, because it's clear that he knew he's been a champion at more weights than Terrence, and he's beaten more champions and taken belts from them. All you guys are doing is splitting hairs, trying to get around that.
Other updates on the Ring IQ Pound for Pound list.
Devin Haney advances from number 9, 2 spots north, up to number 7 for becoming a 2-division champion by beating Regis Prograrius for Regis's WBC title. 3-division champion Shakur S. Stevenson, he re-emerges on the list, right behind Devin at number 8.
For becoming a 3-weight champion, even though he had to pick up a vacant title to do it, he still did it, and that makes him a champion in 3 weight classes.
He's beaten roughly the same number of champions as Devin and taken belts from them. They've both beaten 2 champions apiece. Devin beat George Kambosos at 135 and Regis Prograis at 140, whereas Shakur, he beat Jamel Herring for the WBO and Oscar Valdez for the WBC. What separates them is that Devin's been undisputed, whereas Shakur, he's just been unified.
Devin looked fantastic in his last fight, where Shakur didn't.
But he's there. He earned his spot. Ranked right behind him is San Antonio's own Jesse Bam Rodriguez. For not just being a 2-division champion, but for unifying titles with unbeaten Sonny Edwards in what was a thriller of a fight. I think Jesse's something like 23 years old. He's a very young guy, but think about the fighters that he's fought so far. 2 of the 4 kings at super flyweight, and Carlos Cuadras on short notice, and Sor Rungvisai, who he knocked out, then moving down in weight, becoming a champion at flyweight to eventually take on unbeaten IBF champion Sonny Edwards, who he also stopped. For a guy in his early 20s, Bam Rodriguez is well on his way because he's very accomplished.
Artur drops down from number 9 to number 10, losing ground to Bam.
Activity being the reason that Artur better be. He's the most accomplished guy at light heavyweight, but he's not the most active.
He fought Yard, and that's it.
He's unified, Ring Magazine and Lineal, and that's all well and good, but he hasn't been a champion at multiple weights, the same as literally everybody else on the list.
Virtually all these other guys have been champions in more than 1 division, and that takes skill.
It's hard to stay in character when you're moving up or down in weight, but these fighters have, whereas Artur, he's only been a champion at 1 weight, so that's the way that cookie crumbles. Perhaps if somebody drops off for one reason or another, Artur can regain some ground.
So for the time being, he's ranked at number 10, in the most danger of being bumped off.